Hello everyone. In this video I'd like to teach and review MLA style internal citation and combine that with what you've been learning recently about quotations and paraphrases and how to do that in your inquiry report paper. So let's get started with taking a look at what needs to be cited. The answer is pretty much everything, but specifically direct quotations or even parts of a direct quotation, even if you just use a phrase from someone else, that needs to be cited. Paraphrases from your sources. And remember, that's something where you use different words or different sentence structures, but it's the same idea that you got from another source. That needs to be cited. Information you did not already know needs to be cited. And information that's not common knowledge needs to be cited as well. Just remember that plagiarism is when you have 7 or more identical words without citation. And I've seen people intentionally plagiarize, and I've seen people unintentionally plagiarize. Any identical words that don't have citation or quotation marks, if it's a direct quote, that's called plagiarism. So you want to avoid that in this paper. So what is internal citation or in-text citation? Basically, it's a reference in the middle of your text, in your paper. This is not the same thing as the Works Cited page. These are references in your paper that show where a very specific quotation or piece of information came from. And it's not the full Works Cited entry. It's just enough information to get the reader to your Works Cited page, and then using the information on Works Cited, the reader can then go find the full source. So it's kind of a shortcut of each Works Cited entry, and it goes in your paper with whatever specific information you got from that specific source. So the question is, how do you create one? And there are basically 2 ways to do an internal in-text citation. One of them is just to refer to the author or the source as you're writing, and that author should then be listed in your full Works Cited entry. And so that if your reader wants to know more about that person who spoke in your paper, the reader can go find that Works Cited entry and then find the original source. So you'll need to give the credential, something like this. According to the Center for Disease Control. And I would then have a source in my Works Cited that said the Center for Disease Control. Similarly, Dr. Bernard Stevens, an accomplished physicist, says blah, 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 blah. Whatever physicists say, I don't even understand that. But my Works Cited page would have something, Stevens, Bernard, and it would have that source in the Works Cited. In my paper, I'm just going to refer to the person. And similarly, Carolina Panthers coach Ron Rivera believes blah, 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 blah. Whatever he believes, it's that the Broncos are going to lose the Super Bowl or whatever it is. But that coach, the name of the coach that I'm citing as I write, would then appear in my Works Cited page as well. So that's one way of doing an internal citation. The other way is to create a parenthetical citation, parentheses, with whatever information appears first in my Works Cited entry. Usually that's the author. Sometimes it will be the title of your article or whatever it is you're working with. If there's a page number available, that will be included in the parentheses. And this is again the short form of a Works Cited entry. So let's just see how that looks out. This is my full Works Cited entry that goes in my Works Cited page. And because there's no author, I'm going to take the first information that's here, shorten it a bit, put it in parentheses here and here. Blueprint lays path. And this is what I would write in the text of my paper to show my reader that you can go to the Works Cited page and get the full entry and then find that particular piece. Another one. Here's the full Works Cited entry. Begins with the author's name. So for my parenthetical citation, I'm going to put the author's name and the page number in between parentheses. And that's what will go in my paper. Then the reader can say, hey, I want to find out more about that source. Go to my Works Cited page at the end, get the full information, and find it in this journal, American Economic Review. And lastly, one more. Heller, Stephen, and Karen Pomeroy writing this book. I'm going to use the last names of the 2 people here in parentheses, and the reader who wants to know more can go to that Works Cited page. So hopefully that makes sense. But the parenthetical citation is the one that uses the parentheses with that first information from the Works Cited entry. So let's just take a look at how that works out with punctuation. If I do an internal reference, I just refer to the author in my paper, I would use an introductory phrase or clause and offset it with a comma, like, as Peyton Manning suggests, comma, here's my quotation, period inside the quotation. I would have Peyton Manning in my works cited page. And then in the text, I would just refer to where I got this quotation with the author's name. Similarly, according to Republican presidential candidate Ben Carson, comma, Roe versus Wade should be overturned. Now, there's no quotation marks. That tells the reader this is a paraphrase of what he said, but I still need to cite that the information is there. I would then say this is Ben Carson would be in my works cited page. So even if it's paraphrased, it needs to be cited somehow, and this is the internal reference. Another one, I've got a quotation here. Quote, the opposite of anger is not calmness, it's empathy, according to Dr. Mehmet Oz, Dr. Oz. And again, if this is my reference in my paper, set off with a comma here from the rest of my text, I would need to have Dr. Oz in my works cited page. Some other examples. Sometimes, as you learned in session 3, a quotation can be announced with a full sentence followed by a colon, and that colon indicates we've got a quote coming. So I've got Warren Buffett here saying what true economic value is. Here is a colon indicating I've got a quotation coming. Quotation, blah, 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 about buying a company's, period, and a quotation. So I have cited the source here in my paper. My works cited contains an article by Warren Buffett. I've announced that a quotation is coming with a colon. I've given the quotation and I've punctuated with the sentence end punctuation on the inside. Another example, seasoned television personality Oprah Winfrey offers powerful advice. Again, I would expect to see Oprah Winfrey in my works cited page. I am announcing the quotation with a colon. There's a full sentence behind that colon. And then I give the quotation, sentence end punctuation, and quotation marks. So I've got the proper quotation punctuation, and I've got the proper in-text reference to my source for this quotation. Now take a look at how this all works together with the parenthetical citations. That's putting something in parentheses. If you use a parenthetical citation, parentheses that contain that first information from your works cited entry, it goes at the end of the sentence, not in the middle, even if you use just part of a quote. And the punctuation with that goes right after the parentheses. So I have my paraphrase, blah, 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 whatever Mr. Stevens said in my own words. I put the parenthesis, the author, the page number, the parenthesis, and then I finish my sentence with a period, question mark, or exclamation point. Similarly, if I've got a quotation, got direct quotation here that I took from this source, I put my quotation, no end sentence punctuation here, parentheses, the source from my works cited page, parentheses, and then I put my quotation, my sentence end punctuation at the end of it. And lastly, let's say I've taken just part of a quotation and I'm writing my own text here. I quote part of my source. I continue writing my own source here. I do not end the sentence. Parentheses, the author of that quotation, parenthesis, and then my period, question mark, or exclamation point. So all of your sentence end punctuation is going to come after the parenthetical citation. There's one exception to that. It's coming. But generally speaking, all of that sentence end punctuation is after the parentheses. So let's put that together with a few different kinds of examples. Remember, you are to carefully blend your quotations into your paper, not just throw them in there like pepper, but use part of a quotation, for example. So here's my reference to my works cited page. I'm going to reference the book Walden by Henry David Thoreau, and this would then be in my works cited. Here's my reference to it. I've got little pieces of quotations. I'm using his words, shams and delusions, sound as truths, fabulous, reality is fabulous. And I've got that part in quotations, sentence in there. The New York Times reports, however, that screening for cystic fibrosis is, here's the part that I'm quoting from this source. It's in parentheses, it's in quotation marks. I don't end the sentence. I put a parenthesis, the author, page 66, parenthesis, and period to end the sentence. So most of this is mine. I'm describing the source here, and I've got the author here. I've actually doubly cited this, but I've got part of a quotation and the sentence end after the parenthetical citation. Another example, remember when you blend quotation, you may not need to use the whole thing. So you can take part of it out with 3 little dots called the ellipses and put those where the words you took out are. It's kind of like an apostrophe. You take an apostrophe that maybe represents letters that are missing. Do not becomes don't. You take out that O. Same kind of thing with ellipses. So you've got this full quotation here, and this is my source, parenthetical citation with a period after it. But I don't want the whole thing. It's just too darn long. So I'm going to take out the words, not because of the State Eugenics Committee, and I'm just going to say human improvement is a fact of life because of consumer demand. Quotation ends, parenthesis, author who said this quote, page 75, parenthesis, and sentence end punctuation. A couple other different ways this may work out. Sometimes when you're quoting and blending, you need to change the original wording, the capitalization, something like that, and you use brackets for that. So, the quarterback Joe Namath told the reporter, comma, quote, it's quite simple. They played a better game, scored more points, and that's why we lost. Well, maybe Joe Namath didn't actually say the other team, but you want to clarify what they means for your reader. So you add these words, the other team, and you put them in brackets. And the brackets show the reader, hey, this was my phrase. These were my words. Joe Namath never said the other team. So that's just telling the reader that you have worked with the quotation to blend it. And in terms of citation, I would then expect to see Joe Namath in my works cited. Similarly, here's my citation information at the end, parenthesis with a period at the end. But here's my quotation, and it says, it imposes a heavy procedural workload. Well, what is it? That can be very confusing in conversation and sometimes in writing. So I'm going to clarify what it is. Driving imposes a heavy procedural workload on cognition. So this is probably talking about distracted driving, right? So you have brackets here to show that I, as the writer, am clarifying what the quotation really means, what that it is about. Again, got your quotations, ends with your parenthetical citation, page number, authors, period at the end. Another situation you might encounter, block quotations. If you have a very long quote, 4 lines or longer, you're going to use special formatting for that. And this is the one case where punctuation is a little bit different. You'll introduce your quotation and end with a colon. This is much like the other ways of blending we've talked about. A full sentence introduction, got a quotation coming, here's my colon. But then because it's a long quotation, I want to set it off from the rest of my paper, so this part is a quotation. So I'm going to indent here. And only in this case will I use a period at the end of the block quotation and then my citation. So then my parenthetical citation. Then I go back, finishing off the rest of my writing here, and I change the margins back. You'd use a hanging indent for that, so ask if you're not quite sure how to do that. So just remember, if you've got a block quotation, a colon to introduce it, you indent 1 inch, you don't use quotation marks on your quote, because the fact that it's indented is telling the reader there's a quotation, and then you use a period, and then your parenthetical citation. So block quotations are a little bit different. They really do make a difference in showing where your sources are. One more type situation you might hit, quoting somebody who's quoted in your article. And this is really important if you're doing inquiry. You're using sources that quote people, but the people that are quoted in the article aren't the ones who wrote it. So what do? And you use the word, the answer is you use the word QTD, mean quoted in your source. So let's say I've got Adams here talking about her book Chicken Little. The article was written by J. Smith here. But in that article, there's a quote J. Smith has written. Adam asserts her book Chicken Little that without a doubt the chicken came before the egg. So you've got the same kind of quotation marks here with the periods after your parenthetical citation. But you're saying that Adams was quoted in the article that's in your works cited by John Smith, or J. Smith, whoever he is. J. Smith is in your works cited. Adams is not in your works cited page, but J. Smith is, and in that article by J. Smith, Adams was quoted. A little bit confusing, but you're going to hit this a lot, so let's look at another example. In a May 1800 letter to Watt, Creighton wrote, "The excellent Satanism reflects the immortal honor on the club." You can only guess what this was about, right? The article that's in my works cited page is Hunt and Jacob, and this is the page number where that article came from. Creighton was not in my works cited. Creighton is the one who is quoted in the article by Hunt and Jacob. So, since the reader's not going to look for Creighton in my works cited, you got to say Creighton was quoted in, QTD in, Hunt and Jacob. And same thing as before, quotation marks, parenthesis, QTD in, your author, your page number, parenthesis, and period. It's getting complicated, isn't it? One more example. John Murray calls Tim Smith interesting but egotistical. And the author that's in my works cited page is this Just Ronnie guy, page 34. The person who said this is John Murray. He was quoted in the article by Just Ronnie. So the reader's not going to find Murray in my works cited page. The reader will find Just Ronnie in my works cited page. But this article had a great quote by this guy. So I indicate that with QTD in the author. And one more. Same deal here. This person here, Shelleen, trouble often follows, quote, quoted in the article by Robinson. Ask yourself, Robinson, who's the author of my article? It's Robinson. Who's the person who is written about in the article? It's this guy here whose name I'm not going to attempt to pronounce. And lastly, one other situation you might hit. Quotation within your quotation. You're going to use single quotation marks within a quotation that has double quotation marks. So, the teacher is talking here, and I'm quoting the teacher. Let us explore what is meant by the quote, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, comma. Well, this is a famous quote. I'm referring to that with a single quotation mark here and a single quotation mark here, but the whole thing was said by the teacher. So I've got quotation marks double on either side to show that the quotation that I'm taking contained another quotation. It gets a little complicated. Here's another one. This one was actually from a recent article on the refugee crisis in Europe. This was the article right here. It's about how Turkey is responding to the refugees differently. The article is by Miss Olivia Ward. And so that's my citation at the end, again followed by a period. But in this article there's a quotation by this guy. Again, Turkish name, I'm not going to pronounce it and make a fool out of myself. So he's the guy who's quoted as I look back at my source here, right in here. He's the guy who's being quoted. Miss Ward is not saying this. He is saying it. I am quoting a quotation from him as I quote this particular article. So it all comes together. This is my writing. Turkey's approach to the refugee crisis is the most humanitarian. Colon, to announce that I've got a quotation from a source. Then I begin my quotation from my research by Miss Ward. Quotation, instead of dishing out meals to camp dwellers, Gulager said, Turkey is, quote, giving them electronic debit cards so they can do their own shopping. It's good for the dignity and they can eat the food they like. End of quotation from this guy. End of quotation from the article by Ward, parentheses, period. Again, it gets kind of complicated, so don't hesitate to ask for help if you need some assistance with this. Getting this down takes a while. It takes a number of different experiences with MLA and papers and research. But know that you may hit this kind of situation where you've got a quote within a quote. And this is how you do it. So take it slowly. Pay attention to where those quotation marks are going. So just to remind you, practice makes perfect. The way you're going to learn by these rules is by writing your paper and encountering different situations. So go ahead and refer back to this. That will help you learn the rules. And again, don't hesitate to ask for help.